Good morning. How are you today? All right. Well, it's still early, and why don't we just dive right into our session today? And thank you for that introduction. As shared, we're going to spend a few minutes looking at why all of this change, all of the innovation in the travel space is occurring. And we'll be touching on 5 themes in just a few minutes. But to lay the foundation for what I'll be talking about in this morning, I'd like to begin with this quote. I spend a lot of time in my role working with, over the last couple of years, working with banks. And more recently in 2019, working a lot with the energy industry, and now in the second half of 2019, starting to work a lot in travel and tourism. And what we're seeing in all of these industries is just a tremendous level of change that is happening. Now, most of my work is happening on the side of people. How do you work through these kinds of changes? How do you succeed during these times of change? And what does it mean for the ways in which we need to change our management approaches, or the ways in which we change our decision making? And as we've started to build out the new program for the Tech College, which we'll be talking about in just a few minutes, the same issue now is arising for travel and tourism, and for travel agents in particular. You are on the cusp of what is really, as I'm sure you've read many times, a profound industry change that you're all going to be going through. And a big part of what I'll be talking about this morning is exactly why that is happening. Why are these changes occurring? And what do we need to be thinking about if we want to respond wisely, respond profitably to these changes that are going to be occurring? And to begin thinking about that, there's actually a very interesting report out from MasterCard, which has started to look at these changes and why they're occurring. And one of the things that MasterCard has highlighted are going to be the questions of, number one, how do you stay ahead of the guests' expectations? Number two, how are you going to thrive in this changing business landscape? And number three, what do you need to do to begin preparing for these changes, whether we're looking at small items such as, say, adopting a bot that would be able to respond online to social media challenges, or whether you're going to be adopting to something much larger, such as the use of artificial intelligence, which brings with it the burden of cybersecurity. How do you think through some of these larger, more significant changes? And if you've not had an opportunity to look at the MasterCard study, it's actually a really interesting introduction to some of these questions. And to this particular study, I would also add one other, let's call it a question, one other item. How is it that you might be able to eliminate guesswork out of your jobs? Now, in some ways, that's certainly going to connect directly to this question of understanding the guest's expectations, or it may also connect to how we go through the disruption. But let's focus for just a minute on this question of guesswork. How do we minimize it? And as I lead into that question of guesswork, the answer, at least in terms of your job, is going to tie into these 5 trends. And I'll probably spend about 5 minutes on each one. The first trend is going to be that of the experience economy. And Keith Tan touched on that in his opening remarks this morning, and how this is impacting, or the customers are bringing this changing expectation to your workplace. Number 2, the trend of automation. What information can be collected and automated, reducing that guesswork, reducing human error in our day-to-day processes. Third, looking a little further out on the horizon. How is collaborative intelligence going to factor into your roles? And here we've got a lot to learn from the banks who have been going through these kinds of transformations for a couple of years. Digital marketing and the power of crowds, and also reskilling. These will be the 5 trends that I'll be touching on between now and 10:40. We're already down to 39 minutes. So let's go back to that question of guesswork. And I'm going to give you a quiz. I mean, I'm a professor. I have to give you a quiz, right? I think this is required. But I'm actually trying to make a point with this. So let's begin. I grew up at a time when I've always used travel agents. You're probably happy to hear that, right? I've always used travel agents. And I literally grew up at a time where you would go to a AAA office and they'd give you a plastic bag. And I remember coming home and we'd get the maps out and we'd get the AAA books out. And we would literally spend 1 or 2 nights planning our trip, writing down what we wanted to do, taking it to the travel agent who would plan it for me. So that's probably explained by the gray hair up here, but this is how I grew up. Now, when I moved to Singapore, it was the same thing. I'd go across the street to Holland Village, I found a travel agent that I liked, and I continued to work with that agent. Now, in a few minutes, I'll explain to you the moment that changed, okay? But I grew up, as obviously at a time I was using these agents, but I grew up in small town America. And as you can see here, I'm going to ask you which one of these items is not true. I grew up in small town America, literally had cornfields in front of me, soybeans growing behind me. It was rural America. And unlike so many little boys who were growing up in that time, in that place, I did not want to be a fireman. I did not want to be a policeman. And shock of all shocks, I didn't want to be an astronaut because John Glenn was from Ohio and Neil Armstrong, who walked on the moon, was from Ohio. I didn't want to be an astronaut. I actually wanted to race sailboats in the Olympics. That was my goal as a kid. And so I literally spent my teenage years on a lake until the day arrived that, well, I'll just get to the point. I discovered women. And that changed my view of spending all my time on a lake. There were not many women on a lake, but there were lots of women in universities. So I went on to get not 1, not 2, but 3 different university degrees. My last one is actually in classical rhetoric, of all things. So I studied in Latin and ancient Greek to understand how we communicate to other people. But I retired from that career before I ever taught a day of Aristotle. And I went directly to the University of Minnesota and joined the business school. And again, I was there until the travel bug bites me. And so then I take visiting appointments in Argentina, Humboldt University in Germany, Helsinki School of Economics, Chuo University in Japan. I end up in Singapore, employee 87 at SMU. So the early days of the university, and I loved building a new university. And then all of a sudden I get a call. My dream job comes in. University of Notre Dame calls. Now I can watch college football on the weekends, right? And I say no to the University of Notre Dame because I had met a beautiful Filipina. And that's why I went to university to begin with, right? And one thing leads to another, and we now have 6 kids. So different than the Brady Bunch. Our 3 oldest are girls and our 3 youngest are boys. Yes, they will do national service, don't worry. If there's anything a young man needs, it's discipline. So they're going in. But following that, 6 kids, I need some sanity time. So I spend my free time now training for short triathlons. This is what I do. So get up at 5 in the morning, go run around Pandan Reservoir and come back and swim a few laps. That's sort of my regimen. But these days, I'm actually building a startup focused on Singapore's aging workforce and faculty with IMD Business School as well as Singapore Management University. So that's my story and what brings me here. The point I'm trying to make with this, though, is guesswork. Which one of these is not true? Go ahead and shout out, and don't feel embarrassed because it's all been said to me before. So don't worry. Which one of these is not true? What do you think? The kids? I don't look like I could have 6 kids. Really? Thank you very much. All right. Anybody else want to take another guess? The triathlon? I don't look like I could run a triathlon. You guys are going straight for the jugular here. All right. Actually, the triathlon is true. I've got my Nike miles to show you. It is the 6 kids. I only have 5 kids. So that's the key difference here. But I'm trying to illustrate a point about the world we're going into. How would my travel agent ever know this? I mean, if you took one look at me, you're going, oh no, we're not sending this guy to a fitness camp, no way. But this is what I spend my free time doing, right? How would you ever know this information about me? And how would you know the age of my kids if you don't ask? So now we've got to have plans that are going to be friendly for the 2-year-old. In fact, not just friendly for the 2-year-old, but if I can offload the 2-year-old for about 4 hours, I'm going to love you. I'm really going to, I love the little guy, don't get me wrong, but I'm going to want that free time. So how do you today eliminate that guesswork from the process and give an experience that's personalized to me? Something that really is going to fit my wants and needs and lifestyle. And if it's a week in, I don't know, Bali, something that allows me to spend time with my wife, who I never get to see because we have 5 kids and I'm out training for a triathlon, right? These are the things I'm going to need. Now, fortunately, the megatrends are going to show us how this can happen today. And as we look at the impact these trends are going to have on the industry, I think you've got some really exciting times ahead of you. So let's dive into these. Let's take a closer look at each of these trends. The first one, and as was illustrated this morning, is the rise of the experience economy. Gone are the days where I sit down at Holland Village with my travel agent and I simply say, I want to go to Bali, I want to go scuba diving, book me up. All right, those days are gone. And what we're looking for today are ways to intentionally use services as a stage, literally as a platform on which the goods during that holiday become our props, and I, as the customer, can engage with those props on the stage, and the whole thing ends up being some sort of meaningful experience for me. Now, to illustrate what that experience could look like, pardon the loud background, yet we can tone that down a little bit, but imagine going to Switzerland, okay? It's the top of Europe, and you've got this incredible train ride that takes you up in the Alps. You've got these spectacular views, right? Now, this is going to be, in many ways, a pretty standard trip, at least from my point of view, a pretty standard trip that we could take. And who wouldn't want to go up to the observatory and see the glaciers and take in this experience on the top of Europe? But if we're going to go back to that Harvard Business Review article, what we've basically got here is the stage. And what the experience economy is going to be about is going to be more about what props can we add to this stage. And how can those props ultimately be tailored to me, tailored to what I need as that middle-aged guy who happens to have a young family and pretty much did everything backwards in life. I did my family last, I did my schoolwork first. So how do we tailor this kind of experience? Well, this is exactly what's going on right now. If you were to take this trip to Switzerland, what they start to offer you, for example, is going to be a chocolate experience. All right, or similarly, they have horology experiences where you can go and learn about Swiss watchmaking. You can combine this with, for example, exclusively viewing a tennis match between Roger Federer and Lindsey Vonn, okay? And I mean, what a place to go watch a tennis tournament, right? Or a tennis match. Or you can rent that private helicopter and take somebody to the top of a glacier, and you can have a host with you who's going to explain the geology of, and the changes that are happening here. But it's all about adding props to that stage. And of course, this creates a challenge. How do we know what all the props are? How do we know what's available? How do I know which props to give which customer? This all becomes a challenge of knowledge and guesswork. And how do we eliminate that and make you more effective in your roles? This is where the technology is going to begin to factor into everything. If we look at our second trend around automation, all right, there's lots of examples today of automation. I don't know if anybody uses Jetstar, but when I bring my family in from the Philippines, we tend to use Jetstar because we're flying so many people, it's just cost savings. But I can't remember the last time I actually spoke to a human being at Jetstar. It's all done by bot today. And so if I have any questions, you end up talking to Jess, okay? And we'll see this in hotels today. As we travel, we're starting to see fewer and fewer room keys, that thing that we lose, and it's all now on an app and on our phone. And you can hold the phone up to the door, it opens the door, it automatically turns on the electricity and the lighting and the cooling in your hotel room. Everything is on your mobile phone now. Or at the top, if you walk into the lobby of Swiss Hotel, just a block away from here, that row of people to greet you is gone. You just walk up to a computer, touch the screen, stick your ATM card into the payment, and boom, you're done. So all of these things are being automated today. And if we look at a Google study, 57% of the travelers who were surveyed in 2017, they actually preferred having their experience tailored for them. But that once again raises this opening concept. Guesswork. How do we go about eliminating that guesswork? This really becomes a fundamental problem that we've got to deal with. Too much information. How do we get access to all the information? How do I know everything I need to know about my customer? And how do I put it all together in that moment to give them the kind of tailored experience that they're increasingly looking for? I mean, the more pieces we add to this puzzle, the problem keeps getting a little bigger, doesn't it? Each time, it keeps getting a little bit bigger. So here would be one example, and I like this example because my first international travel was actually to Belize. What an amazing, if you've ever been to Belize, just curious? Amazing destination if you've never been there, especially if you're into scuba diving. But if you want to take this trip to Belize, you begin by choosing from one of these 8 categories. What kind of travel experience do you want? So right away, it's starting to put you into a category, and the back end of this experience is going to start linking the right information given what it is you're looking for. But to make this even more precise, you can now start putting some key words into this box, saying more about what you want. So I want to go to Belize. I want to experience the culture. Maybe I'd like to learn about the food a little bit, okay? Maybe I'd like to learn a bit about the chilies that they grow and process in Belize. You write that in there, and all of a sudden, whatever those props are that are available to start customizing this experience, it now has you in the right category and can start making those links for you automatically and instantly. So the guesswork now starts to get reduced when we do that. The personalization of that experience starts to get increased when we have these kinds of, and this one is a relatively simple tool, but when we have these in place, we start reducing that guesswork, okay? Now, let's take this a step further. That first example of Belize looks at the customer experience. What about your business? Well, what we're doing for the business is, first of all, we're starting to reduce the number of manual and repetitive tasks that you have to pay people for. This, number one, reduces guesswork. Number two, reduces the likelihood of, as point number two here says, reduces the likelihood of error in your business operations. Because let's be honest, people get tired, right? Doing the same thing over and over and over. Well, I don't know about you, but I actually find that boring, all right? That wouldn't be very interesting for me. And if you eliminate those kinds of errors, you also eliminate the cost of correcting your work. You improve the productivity through these kinds of channels. So there's going to be back office benefits to being able to adopt this kind of technology. And also think about things such as invoicing or billing. The technology, it's already out there. It's very easy to adopt. Now, adjusting people, that's the harder part of this equation. But the technology is already there. So the ability to adopt these kinds of tools and start using them with your customers and see the benefits of the instantaneous invoicing or payment right there online. All of these things are available to us today. So there's customer benefits, there are business operation benefits. A lot of upsides to be explored here. Now, it's not risk-free. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. It's not risk-free, but what happens if we now take this a step further? What happens if all this information that you gather, knowing about my family, the lifestyle I live, the things I start to do, and you start putting this information into the cloud? Let's say it's going to be a cloud-based solution. And now I walk into your agency. I sit down with you, okay? All of a sudden, you've got the ability to work with me as a customer in an augmented fashion. You can pull up the profile on Michael Netzley, and you can go, whoa, this guy's got a lot of kids. All right, we need to help him deal with this issue if he wants to relax for a week. I see he likes to scuba dive and run. All right, that's going to tell me something about which kinds of locations at the island are going to be interesting to him. He loves food, maybe some cooking classes for the guy. And now all of a sudden you can start pulling these props out. But because all this information is digitized and you have that augmentation interface, no longer do you, the agent, have to memorize everything that's available about that location. No longer do you need to say, that's great, Michael, can we make an appointment for tomorrow and I'll be ready by then. Let me get back to you on this. All of those kinds of conversations disappear and it pops up on the screen. Now, here's where my work with the banks kind of comes into play. This is exactly what is going on with wealth managers. So if you were to sit down with a wealth manager and make an investment, they're going to have a profile for you. It's going to tell that wealth manager your risk appetite, and as a result, it's going to pull up some recommended investments that they could recommend to me, and immediately, in that moment, when I am ready to have that conversation, they can start talking to me about where I might want to place my money. By analogy, the same thing happens with a travel agency. That when you've got that augmentation, you can pull up my travel profile, you can start looking at destinations, and you can see what props you might recommend to me in that moment when I'm ready to spend my money. You've got my time, you've got my attention, you've got my connection, you're personalizing that conversation. May I have your credit card, please? Swipe, done. It makes for a really interesting conversation. So it's all based upon prediction And it's all based on our ability to improve customer service. So here's where collaborative intelligence becomes our third trend to take a look at. And you know what? This trend is not going away. I had the privilege last year of, I was consulting with EY, and part of that assignment, we were writing you may have seen it, there was a massive report that came out in April about financial services and the impact automation is going to have on it. Well, one of the things that was crystal clear is that all of these jobs in financial services, the job of the wealth manager, the job of the teller, they're not going away. So we don't have to worry about this automation eliminating the travel agent's job. But what's going to happen, and what we learned in writing that report for MAS, is that the job description changes. Any given job may have, say, 25 or 30 specific tasks that are attached to it. Okay? So when we look at this rise of automation, this rise of collaborative intelligence, your role's not going to go away, but some of those tasks, maybe 10 of the 30, will change. And so now your jobs are probably going to become a lot more focused on the customer interface, a lot more focused on tapping into the marketing, for example, things that are going to communicate the right messages to your customers. And those repetitive tasks or things you would have to memorize are going to go away because the technology will take care of that. So this increase of collaborative intelligence is not about jobs going away, but it's about changing the nature of the job and creating job roles where you can create more value for the customer. Whether it's a B2B customer or a B2C customer, it's about creating more value for them. So understanding this really becomes an important part of that equation. Digital marketing inevitably is going to follow from this, inevitably. And what an amazing source of information about your customers. And today, we're certainly living in a world where, in many ways, it's phone-first culture. That when we go on vacation, how many people walk around like this, right? It's literally phone first, if you think about it. But all that information goes into Instagram. It goes into WeChat, it goes into Facebook, or depending upon if it's business travel, it probably finds its way into TripAdvisor or LinkedIn. But it's all going online, okay? This has really important implications for the digitization of your marketing, not only how you get your message out there, but how you tap into that data and leverage that data to everyone's benefit to make this a more valuable exchange for them. And to illustrate the getting your message part out, look at this data. This is amazing. Who is it that we trust today? If we look at Edelman's Trust Barometer, academic experts or industry experts are the most trusted people in the world. Second of all, you get company technical experts. So if you're going to speak from a technical expert from IBM about the automation of your business, that would fall into this category. But number three, this is the big change in the world. People like you. You look to your friend network. You look to people who are at least similar to you and say, did they enjoy that trip? Did they enjoy that restaurant? Did they enjoy that excursion or that tour? What is it that they rate highly? And their opinion about what's good and not good is more important than the employee's opinion. It's more important than the hotel employee's opinion, more important than the travel agent's opinion, more important than the CEO's opinion. All right? what we've seen is an inversion of trust, which the next slide begins to capture. We've seen that inversion of trust. And I grew up in a world where people who had expertise also tend to have authority, and those were the people we trusted. Journalists would have been a good example of this. There is a reason we used to refer to the New York Times as the newspaper of record. But that entire model has been flipped today, and you can see the people with authority are at the bottom, but who's up at the top? People like you. And people like you are the ones who are using Facebook. People like you are the ones who are using Instagram and WeChat and LinkedIn and TripAdvisor. Or if I'm into restaurants when I travel, they're the ones putting recommendations on Vivino. I don't follow sommeliers on Vivino when I want to know what wine to buy. I follow people like me who also love a good Amarone, all right? Now, if we have similar tastes, I want to follow you. I want to know what you're liking and what you're thinking, and I very quickly figure out who are the people's opinions that I'm really going to put weight in. But they're not experts. They're just people like me. So the same thing is going to apply here. As we get our messages out there, it's not what you're going to be saying about yourself that's going to matter in these digital channels. It's going to be what people say about you that matters. And how do you work with those people in order to sort of positively influence those opinions? But once those opinions get out there, there's a lot of resources that now become available to you. And as your digital journey progresses, you can start factoring this information or including this information into your databases, okay? Spreadable media is going to be one of these. The photographs, the videos that we post to Facebook and Instagram. These are things that we can very, very easily tap into. And I'll give you an example in just a moment of a company that tells us and shows us how you tap into that, how you benefit from this information. Identifiers. People today looking for the right hashtag, okay? Are you putting your information out there using the proper hashtags? What are the right networks to be in? Who are the influencers in those networks? These are the kinds of questions that we need to be asking if we want to tap into this digital opportunity and start connecting with the right people and get access to the right information. Now, pause for a moment. I'll give you an example of a company that tells us how to do this. It's a rather interesting example. But I want to illustrate this with, I don't know, maybe I should say, unfortunately, a true story. My beautiful bride looked at me one day and said, I never got a honeymoon. Now you're all looking at me like I'm evil. Now, my list of mistakes in life is long enough and distinguished enough that I knew exactly what to say in that moment. Honey, where would you like to go? There is no other answer here. And she says, Sydney. And my heart just sank. Because you know what that means, right? Shopping. I don't want to spend my honeymoon shopping. So in a rare moment of clarity for this professor, I said, you know, you're only going to be a hop, skip, and jump away from New Zealand. Would you like to go see the mountains? Oh, yeah. She thought this was a great idea. And now I'm going, yes, all right. I get to enjoy my honeymoon. And I immediately did nothing. May and June passed. I did nothing. I didn't go to Holland Village. I didn't see my travel agent. I did nothing. July arrives. I meet a Kiwi. And I say, mate, if I'm going to take my wife to New Zealand end of November, I know that's the front end of your summer, where might she still see at least a snow-capped mountain? He says, oh, you got to go to Queenstown. Great, it's July. I now know where I'm going. August and September pass. I do nothing. October is here. Rather than planning my honeymoon, I am on Twitter talking to somebody about how I have not planned my honeymoon to Queenstown. And at that moment, I hear the harp chords chime, a ray of light shoots into my office, and I swear God sent me this message. Queenstown Holidays, everything you need to know, including deals on visiting Queenstown, New Zealand, and staying in a hotel. Marketing has just changed for me. Do I need to go to Holland Village right now? No, I do not. But if this were pushed to me from the agency in Holland Village, I would still be using them. But I click on this, and there we go. You've got the magnificence in the background. You've got the lake, and I look on the left and I say snow. Perfect. My wife is a Filipina. The only cold air she ever felt came out of the refrigerator. This is perfect. Golf. I know better than to even look at that one. I'm not going there. Stay. It's a honeymoon. You've got to have a higher level. You've got to have a balcony. It's got to be looking at the mountains, right? You've got to get the right setting for this, because you're going to then go explore. You're going to bring back a really nice New Zealand Pinot Noir, and you're going to go to the hotel room and sit on the balcony and say, gosh, I'm a lucky guy to be married to you. Isn't life great? Okay, you're going to go do these things. Now, in about an hour and a half, using links and discounts off of this website, I had booked round-trip tickets to Sydney and back, round-trip tickets from Sydney to Queenstown and back, a suite on Darling Harbour, the proper hotel room looking at the magnificence, and a private helicopter to take her to the top of a glacier. And I am pleased to say that because of that marketing, we are still married. She did not leave me. So there she is, first time in her life that my lovely bride got to see snow. All right? But it's an example of how marketing is changing. This may have very well been pushed out by the travel bureau at Queenstown. But again, anybody can do this today. But in order to do that, you've got to know how. And here's where the reskilling of our workforce is going to become so very, very important. And we are blessed. We are blessed to be in Singapore, where you've got access to Skills Future, for example, where you've got high quality internet connection. You can do a Udemy or an edX course, for example. You have huge numbers of independent players who can come in and give personalized training at really far below global norm in terms of cost. It's very, very affordable. Or, think, what I'm trying to say here with this is, think about how it is you're going to reskill and acquire the abilities that you need. It's really easy to do in Singapore compared to other parts of the world, okay? But keep in mind, this is going to happen fast. This is going to happen really, really fast. That's what I learned working with the banks. That's what I'm seeing right now as I work in the energy industry. Once this unleashes, it happens really, really fast. And to support you, and as Keith had mentioned this morning, with SMU, we're launching the Tech College, which is going to be a 3-module course. The first course is going to look at digital innovation, so you're going to be stuck with me on that one. But we'll be talking about how these technologies are disrupting your industry. The second one looks at the future of work. You actually get your hands on the technologies and run through a design thinking process to figure out how to make it work for you. And the third one's going to look at data and cybersecurity. Once you get all of this data, what do you do with it? How do you tap into it and get insights? And of course, once you've got the data, how do you protect it? Because you don't want to be on the wrong end of that equation. So there's a lot of things that can be done to reskill. But when it comes now to your business and these final comments, I would really ask these three questions, which bring us back to that MasterCard study that I began with. What investments are you going to make to stay ahead of these changes? And here, the research is clear. You create substantially more value for your business if you adapt proactively. If you wait and you adapt reactively, it tends to simply be keeping up with the Joneses and getting your costs under control. It's not really about value creation at that point. So how are you proactively going to invest in guest expectations? How are you going to differentiate yourself in a red sea of competitors? And how are you going to prepare your people for that disruption so that they can provide that kind of customized, hyper-personalized experience that customers are looking for today? So 3 things I'll leave you with to perhaps think about this. If you'd like to know where you are on your digital journey today, it's just a simple 3-minute digital maturity index that you could take. Now, STB is going to be launching in 2020, a much more comprehensive one. So do keep your eye out for that. But here's just a simple 3-minute one you could do today. Could you begin investing in your digital capability? Can you go learn A/B testing? Can you learn agile or design thinking? Or heck, just go to Kinokuniya, or I suppose I'm showing my age, go to Kindle and just pick up a really good book on digital transformation. These will be the things that'll help you move forward, okay? And I think I've got as a final thank you slide, I believe. Yes, we have the minions up there. So that should bring us right to the end of our time. I hope these 5 trends have given you something to think about in the way that they're starting to play out in your industry. But whatever you do think about taking that next step. Do try and do something more with this. I'll very briefly leave the index up for you. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your conference today.